Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Neville Short, who is an Alexander Technique teacher in Glasgow, Scotland. We're going to talk today about the first chapter of F. Matthias Alexander's third book, The Use of the Self. The chapter is entitled Evolution of a Technique. It holds a kind of a preeminent place, I think, in Alexander literature. And Neville's got a very interesting take on it, a bit from a theater and acting perspective, and that's what we're going to talk about. Neville, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, but I have to say I'm nothing to do with the theatre nor an actor. You're quite right in your introduction, but it's more about how FM's interest as an orator and as a theatre person might have influenced how he wrote it.
Yes, that's what I meant to say. Yeah, so we all know Alexander was a reciter and an actor, and so you have a fascinating take on what that chapter is about. But I think before we get to that, before we start quoting passages and going into the weeds, I think we need to address the question, did the events as portrayed in that chapter actually happen the way he recounts them in that chapter?
Absolutely. And this is particularly the case because for those who rely on F.M. Alexander's words and who almost literally see what he wrote as gospel, they tend to see every word as being the gospel truth. And I think that is problematic because we don't have any evidence, as far as I know, that FM was working from any notes that he took at the time or even close to the time. And we also increasingly realize that memory is a reconstructive process. We don't actually remember what happened. It changes in our memory. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, it's highly unlikely that FM wrote it exactly as it happened. But that doesn't mean we should discount it, because the least we can say about it is that he saw some veracity and some usefulness in it at the time that he wrote it. Now, leading on from that, there's a second perspective that I personally find very useful. I think it was Terry Fitzgerald who theorized a few years back that perhaps under Dewey's influence, FM wrote that chapter not as historical chronological fact, but as a how-to guide, how to repeat what he did. I can remember when I was doing science experiments in secondary school, the first part that we had to write was a list of the apparatus we used. And I think from that perspective it could well be that what FM was writing down was the steps he thought somebody else could follow in order to, as he said himself, get where he got to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it could be almost seen as a myth or a biblical story that may or may not have actually played out that way at the time, but there's an essential truth there.
Yeah, and I don't think referring it to that way is in any way disrespectful, because all institutions have their foundation mythologies. Sure. All cultures have their foundation mythologies. Right. And evolution of a technique, in a very similar way, is the starting myth of Alexander Technique. Whether it's true or not, it's certainly useful, whether it's true or not.
Right. So now you have a 3-act perspective on it.
Well, as you said earlier on, it's very easy to get stuck in the weeds of that chapter, because it is about 30 pages long, and FM, for better or worse, uses a lot of words in some very long sentences, and I realized that I couldn't really get a clear view on what he was talking about because there was so much stuff to go through. So I thought that to simplify it for myself, I would change it from a text into a flow chart, with the intention of leaving all the important points in, but taking out anything that might be irrelevant in the bits in between. Mm-hmm. And I was scribbling along almost literally with crayons on A4 sheets of paper, and realized that it fitted as a flow chart really neatly on 3 separate sheets, and it stuck out then as a kind of a hero's tale, where he starts off with his problem, and he makes an attempt and fails, and then he says he goes back to his premises and he makes an attempt and fails, and a third time he makes an attempt and succeeds, and off he goes. And then it comes out basically as a 3-act play, because there's reasons why most good jokes have 3 parts. There's reasons why most good stories have a beginning, a middle, and the end. That's a format that works for us. Mm-hmm. So I think it is possible that, given his own background in the theatre, he was just quite prone to putting his own story across in a 3-act format. By extension, then, he not only is he literally setting the scene for us, where he goes through these 3 acts, but once he gets started, he's the only performer. There's nobody else involved in this process, as far as he's concerned, apart from FM, once he gets started. So it isn't just a 3-act play, it's a one-man show. And
right, which is what he did a lot of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not saying this is the truth. There's no way we're ever going to know, but it certainly fits his character.
Yeah.
And it also means that if somebody else wants to follow what they're doing, they're essentially following a 3-act play in which they're playing the lead performer.
Yeah. So can you briefly summarize the 3 acts in a little more detail? There were 2 failures and 1 success, right?
Sure. Well, the briefest I could put it in probably would be Act 1, he has a problem, he discovers primary control. It doesn't quite solve the problem.
It helps, but it doesn't do the trick totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
And slight diversion here. It is interesting how he says his condition improved, but not a great deal.
Right.
I find that intriguing as a kind of a subplot in to what extent did it improve, we're not really sure. Anyway, Act 2, he's still got a problem. He realizes that he's gripping the ground with his feet. Mm-hmm. So he realizes for at least the first time, maybe the second time, that it's an all body thing. It isn't just head, neck, back. It's an all body issue. Mm-hmm. But again, that doesn't quite work, because he finds he can't maintain his process when he's going about ordinary life. So again, it doesn't quite work. Act 3, he realizes that, to use the technical jargon, the problem is his end gaining. So he realizes that if he wants to do something, he's going to have to figure out what his directions are, but at the last moment, at the critical moment, as he would say, either do the thing or not do the thing, or do something else. And then he says that when he works in that process, everything works, and the hero succeeds and moves on.
So that third step, which is not making a decision until the last minute, last second really, about what you're going to do, seems to me to be a way of dealing with, if you're using an Alexander direction, there's such a temptation to help it out a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm gonna, especially if a direction seems to be useful, like it's producing a nice result. There's just a huge temptation to want to help it along with a little bit of doing, right?
I agree completely. And you know, we whether we'll admit it or not, we want to succeed. And there is plenty of scope for any of us to fool ourselves during those last steps
Hmm.
that we're doing something other than we're doing.
Right.
It's one of,
And
actually,
yeah, go ahead. Go
it's
ahead.
one of the reasons I really enjoy tango dancing, because you go through that process when you're dancing Argentine tango, but you're with a partner.
So you have no
And it
idea what's going to happen next, right?
Yeah, but more immediately, if you end gain and try to plan a couple of steps ahead,
Uh-huh.
and then your partner does something different,
Right.
you have a problem then, because reality isn't what you thought it was going to be. But
So,
I think that one of the other interesting aspects of FM's emphasis in that about what he was planning to do next
hmm.
was he's talking about it in quite physical terms. He's talking about thinking about what he's going to do.
Hmm.
And I think a shortcut to that might be not so much thinking about what you're going to do, but how you are when you do it.
Hmm.
Because I think one way of describing his intention in that last part of the process at the critical moment is not being too invested psychologically or physically in what's happening next.
Hmm.
And another way of approaching that is just a more direct psychological one of not being as invested in what happens.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not suggesting, and I don't want to suggest that one of those things is better than the other. But for me, one aspect of Alexander technique is that we have to use every tool that's available to us to work through to the end that we might want to achieve. Because if we stick to one process, it becomes stale, it becomes less playful, it becomes a habit.
Hmm.
So I think in very orthodox, very traditional Alexander technique, there's a particular catechism, a particular list of instructions, but only having one way of doing it, I think, is counterproductive for us, because it means we'll be less alive to what's actually happening in the moment.
Hmm. But do you think that third step does have to do with not uh, trying to deal with the temptation to help a direction out?
I think it's a step earlier, really,
Hmm.
where it's about end gaining. It's about focusing too much on the outcome rather than what's happening in between times.
Hmm. And how is that different from helping a direction out in your view of things?
Well, the example that comes to mind is I found when working with people in that classic chair work where the pupil is going from standing to sitting,
Hmm.
that it's quite usual for the person to be anticipating the chair,
Right.
and then you'll see their butt sticking out a bit as they come down
Hmm.
into landing. And what I've come to realize is that when we want somebody to sit in a fluid, graceful, poised way, they have to sit down as if the chair, without thinking about there being a chair there. I mean,
Hmm.
to use the jargon, when somebody sits down fluidly in a chair, it's just as if they're doing a monkey and the chair happens to be there.
Hmm.
When they disregard the chair, they come down and the butt doesn't stick out. I mean, to talk about movement specifically,
Right.
and it all happens much more fluidly. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because that can be dealt with separately from their giving directions,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the outcome that I'm discussing about them sitting rather than the directions that they might give, and it's useful in itself. And this isn't to disagree with you, Robert, because there are so many layers to all of this that you've made a perfectly valid point, and I'm not saying that it isn't true. It's just that at my stage in going through this, it's more about the person's frame of mind towards what they're trying to achieve,
And not so much about their frame of mind towards the direction they're using.
Yeah, but in 10 years' time, if I'm still doing this, I might have a very different viewpoint. But at the moment,
Right.
it's what I've just outlined.
Because Alexander himself was interviewed by one of the students on his first training course, Trevelyan, and one of the things Alexander says, I wish I had the exact quote, but he says, none of my students will believe that all they have to do is think the thought and that'll do the trick. He said they're all slaves to their muscles. They all want to add something, and which is a kind of an end gaining in itself. It's a little different than the one you described.
Mm-hmm.
And Marjorie Barlow, his niece, I wish I had that quote handy. It's in her book, An Examined Self. Describes a conversation with Alexander, in which, and then she then sort of paraphrases what he says, I think, that learning how to self-direct without adding anything, that is what real thinking's about. But there's this huge temptation to add something, to implement the direction somehow. And she then has this nice phrase, but you really don't want to do that even a teeny weeny bit. So those are her words. And I think it deals with that whole, it is maybe a different kind of end gaining than you're talking about, but it does seem related to me.
Sure, and I think the point you've brought up just there is one of the core questions that, in a way, we all have to figure out individually in Alexander Technique. It's how much doing is too much doing
Mm-hmm.
when you're giving directions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the places, I think, where language falls down, because we can describe our perspective in words to somebody else, but all we're giving them then are words, an imitation of what our opinion is,
Mm-hmm.
rather than something a bit more useful.
Right. Well, of course, the problem is that even a so-called pure thought is going to involve some doing. The way we're structured, you can't really think a thought without some muscles being activated.
Yeah, and we have, I have at the moment, too limited a vocabulary for some of these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Even the words thought and thinking,
Mm-hmm.
if it's purely conceptual thinking, like what's the capital of France or something mathematical, to a great extent that's very different in its physical manifestation than thinking about movement.
Yeah.
And it's therefore leaves us open to apparent disagreement where there might not be any, and vice versa,
Right.
because we might not be talking about exactly the same thing. I don't think that's an insurmountable problem, but I know that I don't have a vocabulary yet for distinguishing between different kinds of thought, and that's important in Alexander Technique.
Right. There's one other thing I'd like to add about that chapter. That chapter, Evolution of a Technique, Marjorie Barstow was around when that book was being edited for publication, and she said that Alexander and the people on his training course and other people around would spend hours working on language in that. They wanted to make it as accessible as possible. Every word was thought about very carefully. And that's one thing. And the other thing she said was that in that chapter, in her view, the most important phrase of all, or sentence perhaps, is where he says, somewhere in one of those acts, he says, "It would be impossible for me to tell you all the things I tried that didn't work." Do you remember that little phrase?
I don't, to my own
It's
my
in
own
there.
detriment.
I don't know what act it's in, but he specifically says, in effect, I went up all kinds of blind alleys that didn't work out. Too many to mention here, which could be partly editing to get it into the 3-act format.
It could be, or it might not be true. We just don't know.
Yeah, we have no idea what the actual reality was.
But I think, but again, there is this language issue because as FM said so explicitly in the book before that, conscious constructive
conscious control. Yeah,
that's the one. He gives at least 2 pages to describing how his own terminology doesn't fit what he wants, which I think is which I really respect him doing.
Yeah. He says he was. Is that the one where he says someone criticized me for long sentences? Maybe or maybe that's where he says I'm going to use certain words, but they're just approximations. I'm going to use the word physical. I'm going to use the word mental, but truthfully, everything is both. Something like that. The psychophysical idea.
But he even gives an example. I can't remember whether he was using free the neck or relax the neck, but he was saying this is a dangerous instruction to use if you haven't been given the appropriate experience by an Alexander Technique teacher. So for me, a lot of this comes back to, a lot of Alexander Technique comes back to what the function of language is and what the limitations of language are. And one of the reasons why I ended up doing a synopsis of evolution of a technique as a flow chart was I was listening to the radio about a commentary about how graphic novels, how cartoons are now almost an accepted part of literature, although there is some people who would dispute that. But there was a graphic artist who was saying that one of the things that a graphic novel can do that writing can't do is it can explain or it can illustrate a number of things happening at exactly the same time. Yeah. And unfortunately for us, FM was a man of his time who thought that as a professional everything should be in writing. If he had a graphic artist with him, somebody who did cartoons, Use of the Self and all the other books, I think would probably be more amenable to us because we could see these things not in a linear format, but in a way in which a number of things are happening at the same time across the body or across the mind and body.
Wow, now there's a project for an Alexander teacher who has artistic leanings.
Great.
Not me, but I can imagine. I know a few people in the Alexander world who could probably do that. Maybe this would be a good place to end our conversation. What do you think on this topic?
Yeah, I think you're right, Robert.
So my guest today has been Neville Short, an Alexander Technique teacher in Glasgow, Scotland. I'll put a link to his site by the interview. If you're in that area and you're interested, give him a call or send him an email. I'll also put a link to more information, to a site that has more information about the technique, and it'll tell you how to locate a teacher anywhere in the world. Neville, thanks so much for this.
And thank you, Robert, for the opportunity.